everybody. Welcome to the Pop Occulture Show. I'm your co-host, Lilith Dorsey, and my other co-host is over there, some way. What's your name, other co-host?
I'm Jason Winslade, and welcome to the latest episode of Pop Occulture with Lilith Dorsey and Jason Winslade. We've got both our hats on today. They're both New Orleans hats, because I got this in New Orleans. You're in New Orleans. So they both qualify.
Yeah. I may have found this in New Orleans. I have all these hats that I don't know where they came from. So this was the hat. This is totally not coordinated. We did not say, oh, let's wear hats for this episode.
Anywho, speaking of New Orleans, we have another surprise. We have another property that has a New Orleans connection. The Mayfair Witches on AMC, which is mostly set in New Orleans, partially set in Scotland. The second show that AMC is doing based on Anne Rice's extended, Vampire Witches universe. The first, of course, being Interview with the Vampire.
That's the marketing hook. Yes, it's part of the Immortal Universe.
They've got the Interview with the Vampire, Mayfair Witches. They're going to do a Talamasca series, which I think they've already filmed. And if you're unfamiliar with that universe, the Talamasca is kind of like the Watchers Council. They're sort of they're the people that are the mostly, I guess, humans behind the scenes who are sort of secretly monitoring and influencing the world of the immortals.
I do have to say this when we start. I completely forgot until we started filming today that I'm in the All of Them Witches documentary, which was the documentary that accompanied Mayfair Witches when it first premiered. So I did find myself when I was watching it going, who did they talk to? And now I sit here, I'm like, oh, they talked to me and a bunch of other witches.
That's right.
It was an amazing documentary, and I hope people get to take a look at it, because I think that everything that's lacking in the show we sort of covered in that documentary. There's a lot of really amazing people in there. Empress Karen Rose, the Hood Witch, Brie Larson, and it was a fantastic experience being part of that. And I love the way they put it together. We had a female director, so I think there's really been a push, especially with the Immortal Universe, to be more inclusive. I know that's like a dirty word now, but I think that's something that they were really trying, and they did a great job with it.
Yeah. I was reading about some of the production, and that, Anne Rice apparently was very excited about having her stuff under one roof in a shared universe, and was very into the idea of all the different shows. But she died in 2021, I think, and it was just as these were going into production, so she never did see them. And this series is run by women. It's produced by Esta Spalding, who is she's screenwriter, author, poet, and Michelle Ashford, who did The Pacific and Masters of Sex in 2013. So it stars Alexandra Daddario, another sort of True Detective connection there, as Rowan Fielding, and it's got pretty decent cast, and Harry Hamlin, of course, is the Mayfair patriarch with his thick accent and his dyed black hair. And in the first season, one of my favorites, and I love it, every time Beth Grant shows up, I not only do I question my devotion to Sparkle Motion, but I always love it when she's in the show, and she doesn't make it past the first season. But there'll be some spoilers ahead, by the way. From what I understand, I've never read an entire Anne Rice book, I will admit. Take away my occult card. I remember reading excerpts in the 80s. Back when I was subscribing to Twilight Zone magazine, they were putting excerpts of the Vampire Lestat, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then I think I read some of Interview, because that was published in 76. But I never really got into it. I wasn't super into the writing, and
I'm a big vampire Anne Rice fan. I do the Endless Night Vampire Ball here in New Orleans with those folks, and I know a lot of the vampire people in town. And I read all of the vampires interview. Lestat, Queen of the Damned was my favorite. I even, cosplayed Aaliyah and with my whole like dripping blood kind of crown on. It was beautiful, but I never really got into Mayfair witches, and so I can't tell you about the accuracy of this particular, adaptation property wise. But you can take my witch card too, because there were a lot of things
Yeah,
that I think was
we'll
lacking
get to
in
that.
this, and I
Definitely.
hope it doesn't jeopardize my chances of working with AMC again. But it was
Yeah,
challenging.
yeah,
I'm
we'll get to that.
sorry.
But yeah, I mean, the adaptation, from what I understand, it's just completely different from the books. They have like, different characters and different scenarios, and different people live or die, and stuff like that. So if you do know the books, then you probably will still be surprised at what you're seeing. Yeah, I mean, I guess my overall take was that some of the issues that I had with its interpretation of various witch tropes, I'm not sure if my dissatisfaction was because of the show or whether this is actually an Anne Rice thing. And for some reason, season two, which you haven't seen, but season two, in some ways, uh, I don't want to say it undoes things, but it recontextualizes things in season one that I had a problem with, and that I was like, oh, what they're actually doing is this, and that makes it a bit more interesting and not quite as aggravating as that first season was. I'm not saying that season two is better, but I think there are some pretty good episodes, I think, in season two, and there's the whole Scotland thing, which we'll get to. So break it down. What were some of your issues?
I mean, you said the tropes. So I think that for me, that was also an issue, that there were a lot of sort of stereotypical things that they had going on, that I'm not really happy with the treatment of. I understand that stereotype is always based somewhat in reality. So I think that that's a common thing to have happen, especially in mainstream media, Hollywood, all of that. But I think some of these witch tropes were really, I mean, really disappointing to me. And I know it's not real and la 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 la. So that was really that's not where I'm coming from. I think the reality is more exciting, and that's where it loses me, because I think that they change things around. And I felt that not only with the witchy tropes and things like that, I felt it with the New Orleans tropes. In contrast of our last show, Beasts of the Southern Wild, I saw a lot of parallels. While I was watching Mayfair Witches, I was like, oh, this is Jason's pick for the New Orleans story, and it's like maybe 5 or 6 clicks left of center. And mine was not, I think, what most people outside of Louisiana would expect. I think everybody would be hard pressed to see Mayfair Witches as having an accurate
Sure.
representation of New Orleans. You made me watch the Second Line episode, which has my dear friend Sunpai Barnes in it, and the Northside Skull and Bones gang. But it's like, okay, yes, you'll be in New Orleans, and hopefully you'll see Northside Skull and Bones gang, and maybe you'll get a shot of some liquor sold by somebody on the street. So those things exist, but where they take it and how they contextualize it is just so wrong. You know what I mean? And I think the reality of it is more beautiful. The reality of it is more complex and fascinating, and in these little teeny bites about, oh yeah, you can buy a shot on the street, and maybe it's psychedelic, and maybe you'll hallucinate, and maybe your demon lover will come and dance you through the cemetery. All of these things just seem a little fakey fake,
Well, yeah,
tropey
I mean,
trope to me.
it is a tourist's look at New Orleans. I mean, I totally get that, and I would never say, oh, this is the quintessential New Orleans story for me. Um, but yeah, it is definitely a tourist's approach. And I was thinking just now about how, I don't know if you remember that show. Speaking of vampires in New Orleans, that show The Originals, which was that Vampire Diaries
Mm-hmm.
spinoff. Yeah, it wasn't filmed in New Orleans, but they used a lot of French Quarter external shots, And I think that show was like soap opera-y and silly enough that you kind of excused all that. But with Mayfair Witches, it almost seems like there was this claim of authenticity going on there that they couldn't really back up, other than, like, obviously great production design, and the house is fantastic. And I think that second line episode was definitely meant to be, oh, this is our authentic New Orleans episode. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty transparent.
Well, that's why I was contrasting it with the Beasts of the Southern Wild, because then they had, yes, this had Sun Pie, and it also had Quintron and Miss Pussycat. For those of you who watched our holiday media thing with Teflon Kook, who's now Sierra Smugaros, they are very good friends with Quintron and Miss Pussycat. They are very big entertainers here in town. So it did have a tiny bit of the, oh, this is authentic feel of people that people from the neighborhood would know. But then again, they're doing things that are way different than they would have done. And to me, that leaves it really lacking, really, really lacking.
I mean, what really stood out to me is that kind of Anne Rice thing where, I mean, even Anne Rice herself, when you look at her history and the way that she has approached the occult and the supernatural, is very much through that Christian lens, right? And whether she was in the point of her life where she rejected it or embraced it, because she went back and forth, it's still through a Christian lens. And so you're going to get this distortion. I think what she does with kind of classic pact with the devil kind of tropes, I think there is something interesting there, especially once you get into season 2. I think there is room to debate that, but also just the ickiness of the family relations. Let's back up and lay out the scene before we get to we get to the spoilers.
Sure.
So the way that the show introduces us to the characters is that Rowan Fielding, who's a neurosurgeon, I think she's in San Francisco, and she's leading a lonely life on a boat, and as you do, and but yeah, she's got some kind of latent magical powers, and she can give brain aneurysms to men who piss her off.
I'm snapping for that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely this kind of feminist fantasy thing of like these men who are taking away her power, and she shuts them down, which is great. But then, yeah, she gets called to New Orleans because her mother, played by Annabeth Gish from X-Files.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Irene Cara, my lookalike. That was her adopted mother.
The gal that played the Irene Cara role in the show, Erica
Gimple. There we go.
Was her adopted mother.
Yes.
And there is this sort of strange, like, they don't really address it, but there's this kind of strange racial thing happening with the Mayfairs where, like, some cousins are black, and there is that thing where these older black women who are part of the family who seem to be on the side of the super manipulative patriarch.
One of them gets locked in the basement. I mean, again, like this is a very complicated racial representation. We've got Cyprian, also very complicated racial representation.
So yeah, I mean, there's a whole thing where her mother has basically been sedated most of her life, ostensibly to keep away this Lasher character who, at least in the first season, is pretty much shown as like a seductive spirit that like the whole thing of like, ooh, let me in and I'll give you all this power, sort of like classic pact with the devil.
He has cake. Yeah. That was my favorite part about it. He's like, you want cake? I was like, demons have cake. That's my notes. Yes. Demons have cake.
If you're New Orleans, you want cake. Yeah, I was thinking about how it is that classic trope of the pact with the devil, because I was thinking about when we were talking about The Exorcist, and how when there was that Fox TV show, they sort of reframed possession as a seduction, and this show definitely dives into that thing, but it's not really possession that is the ultimate goal. There's more to that later on. It turns out that Rowan's uncle, Cortland, is actually her father, because he raped her mother.
there's a connection between this and Rosemary's Baby and Apartment 7A, because it's not even just seduction by a demon, it's insemination by a demon. Like, we're trying to produce a child. This is where we're going with this. And so much of Mayfair Witches, what I saw in the first season, was about these kinds of, manipulative, evil, demonic, masculine moments where these Mayfair witches that are supposed to be all that, badass bitches, are getting subjugated and, defiled literally by these characters.
Yeah, there's this notion that okay, if you let him in, and there's that thing with where like he appears to them as children, and basically grooms them for their entire lives. Like, there's this imaginary friend, and even the local priest like knows about it. He's like, don't talk to that guy. But apparently the Mayfairs are old money, so they have all this power in New Orleans. But it's also not clear how they got how it went from Scotland to New Orleans, and that became where their seat of power was instead of where they were in Scotland anyway. But yeah, so it does have flashbacks to like family of women who have who are obviously village healers and midwife, that whole thing, and that ultimately when she says yes to Lasher, she then can have revenge on the village that has persecuted her. So again, it's taking all that, the classic witchcraft tropes and kind of using that to tell the story. For some reason, by the end of the first season, Rowan, who is clearly not, most of the time, not an idiot, knows that she's being manipulated, and he's doing all this stuff to her to mess with her, but yet she, in the end, says yes to having the baby. It has you questioning, is this real power that these women are getting? Are they ultimately under his thumb, or are they using him to get what they want? And so there's definitely this power thing. And then that becomes a little bit clearer in season 2, which just totally turns everything on its head. So Lasher, played by Jack Houston, this Irish actor who I think the last thing I had seen him in was Fargo, where he was the completely opposite character, where he's all fumbly and he's supposed to be all like sexy and seductive in this, and I didn't quite buy it. He's a great actor, but like, yeah, just because of what I had seen him in, I was like, how is this guy like this suave, seductor? I don't know, but so he's messing with her, and like he's I'm your guardian, I'm your lover, all this kind of stuff. But then basically when she gets impregnated, then he becomes her son. So in the beginning of season 2, it's like the kid grows up like within like a week or something like that to become him. Love that she has for him is now no longer lovers, it's the love of a mother. So again, icky.
Yeah,
and
very
there's
icky.
this whole thing where and there, if you do get the second season, I would watch. I think it's the first episode just for this, because Thora Birch is in it, who we haven't seen in forever, still looking like incredible, I think. And she's a card reader. She's reading tarot cards, and I guess she's like one of the, because like apparently there's a lot of Mayfairs out there. I guess the Mayfair patriarchs are very prolific. There's lots of cousins and stuff like that. So yeah, when Lasher becomes human, and he doesn't remember when he becomes a human, he doesn't remember who he was before. He doesn't have any memory of his life as a spirit. They never use the word demon, and he doesn't know about what he did with Rowan. He's out looking for action, but he's like drawn to Mayfair women, and he's like super like he can't control himself. He's aggressive, and he seduces these women, but he kills them all because I guess their heart gives out or something like that. Like they can't handle it. And we find out later why that is. So Thora Birch is one of these women that he hooks up with, who dies from whatever, too much passion or something. I don't know. So even though he's killing people, he's still sort of like shown as like an innocent. and not really knowing what he's doing or how how it's happening, and Rowan's kind of covering for him and all this stuff. What the season 2 does is it turns this whole demonic possession thing on its head, and it's like, oh no, he was actually, when he was alive, was this other being called a Taltos, which is this sort of like angelic slash demonic slash pagan god slash whatever, like, who just has all these powers, and like his blood brings magic, and his blood heals the land, and like, when his blood spills in the forest, all these flowers come up, and it's like all about life. So this Taltos figure, it turns out he is really an innocent, which doesn't really square with how sort of kind of evil seeming his spirit is in season 1. Like, it doesn't quite. I don't really get. It's almost like it wants you to forget what what happened in the previous season. I don't know.
Well, you said they changed it. I was like, you can do that? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's a thing. Like, you've established this character, and now you're telling me it completely switches. It sounds like there's a lot. I know we're talking about how this is a female-led production, but it sounds like there's a lot of misogyny here in some of this kind of storylines, and I'm sad about that, like, I want this to be about feminine empowerment, these Mayfair witches, this line of women that had to be women, right? Like, the male baby came out with the webbed fingers, so that it had to be taken away and stuff, that whole storyline. And I will say this, some of those Scottish accents were the worst I've ever heard in my entire life.
They get a bit more authentic when they actually go to Scotland present day. So, but yeah, there's this whole thing when they go to Scotland, and there's almost like Wicker Man type of feel to it, because there's like a Michaelmas celebration going on. With this show, they're doing a season per book. So this season 2 is the last season. Season 3 is the Taltos season. So maybe there's something that like brings it together and makes it make sense. But ultimately, yeah, it's like the true evil is the Julian, who's the dead patriarch who comes back to life and then basically inhabits Cortland's body. And Julian's played by Ted Levine, who's actually younger than Harry Hamlin. But Ted Levine, famously from, it puts the lotion in the basket from Silence of the Lambs. But he's great. Like, every minute he's on screen, it's fantastic. And there's this whole thing where like he lives in the Victrola. They put the stylus of the Victrola on, prick their finger to get blood. So I don't know what that does to the record, but they're like able to like focus and like go into this sort of other world. There's this episode where like it's actually, again, from a production design standpoint, it's really cool. Where Rowan sees the house as a dollhouse, and she sees the people moving in and out of the spaces, and she has this sort of God's eye view of what's happening. But yeah, there's definitely this sense that the Taltos is this kind of like primal celestial energy that doesn't really have a sense of what it is to be human, even though I guess at one point they were human enough to like run a church and and then ultimately they're like seen as Saint Ashlar, because he's a healer, because he performs miracles, because he can heal people.
Right.
So that it becomes clear that he's been sacrificed in the past. So there's this whole, again, going back to that sort of like Fraserian golden bough king sacrifice thing, sacrifice the king to heal the land. So it's almost like she's taken these bits and pieces of pagan folklore and sort of made like, okay, well, this is what maybe really was like, and whether that's successful or not is another question. But yeah, there's this sense that he's this other being, and he's really an innocent that's been manipulated by this evil line of Mayfair men, and the women that carry their water, right? The women who are like, well, we're going to get power from this too, so we're going to go along with it. There's this marriage where they bring Lasher together with this other Taltos woman. They can't like keep their hands off each other. They have to hold them back with like pulleys and ropes, and they let them go into this bower, like a gazebo, where they just get it on. And again, that's very much like sort of pagan great rites, Wild Hunt kind of thing going on there. She immediately has babies, that get older pretty quickly, and they do this thing where it's clear that the Scottish people are going to sacrifice all those babies and drink their blood to get the powers. It plays into the whole witches eating babies, but it's in this case it's not human babies, it's these godlike babies that they're going to get the power from. This is what's perpetuating the legacy of witchcraft and magic, is through this manipulation of a divine being or something. So it's really messed up when you think about it and what it does to what real witchcraft is, but it's Anne Rice.
No, I agree. I mean, there's a huge history of witches in Scotland, so I'm glad they went to Scotland, but it sounds like we went amiss, right? And the same way that I'm talking about it going amiss about New Orleans.
I was so confused by the end of season 2 of like, what were they trying to do, and how does that compare to what was set up, and what are they going to do in season 3 that resolves all of this? And again, haven't read the books, and I don't know if there is a resolution. But I know that just from a little bit that I looked up, that it's completely different from the books, and that then there may even be like a different kind of like main focus. I don't know, but this just kind of goes off the rails.
It's not like visual poetry like I see that they're really producing for the Interview with the Vampire series.
Definitely a difference in quality there. I do really enjoy Harry Hamlin. He does that kind of role very well. He's playing multiple roles actually, because he's possessed by Juliet at one point. And so there's definitely some entertaining stuff in there. There's the guy who plays Sip is okay. He's chasing her the whole time. And even more so in season 2, where they're not really together most of the time. They don't ever use the word, but because they call him an empath, but what he's really doing is psychometry.
Yeah, that's in my notes too. I just love those psychometry scenes, because that was one of the things I thought was the most true to life and realistic. The fact that, the way he gets when he takes the glove off and touches the thing. I'm sure there's witches watching this, not just Anne Rice fans, and they understand that phenomena. Especially in the ATRs, we have a really big thing about what we can touch, what we can't touch, what's okay and what's good and what's not okay, and don't touch it, So I thought that was very accurate.
It's clever. There's a few times where he's trying to read something, but all he gets is static because it's been wiped. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff in that realm. But yeah, I still enjoyed it. I still I watched every episode and was sucked into the story and everything, and was kind of fascinated once it got to the whole like Lasher's got to protect his babies thing from the evil Scottish witches who are going to drink their blood. So it's entertaining, but yeah, it's nowhere near the quality, the poetry, as you say, and I totally agree with that, of the vampire series. So I think that's about as much as we can say about Mayfair Witches.
I think so.
We've spoiled it for you if you haven't seen it. Some of it, but we haven't spoiled a lot of it. Just the major strokes. So you'll still be surprised probably by a few twists and turns and who dies and who lives and all that. But it's I'll always watch a show that's witchy set in New Orleans, because why not? I mean, we can be critical of it. But we've got a few more episodes left this season before we take our summer break for all the fun stuff that we do.
Woohoo!
So stay tuned, and please continue to follow and subscribe to see all the episodes. We got a lot of them now. We'll see you next time on the Pop Occulture Show.
Thanks for watching.